Evening, Nick.
Hey, John, how are you?
Doing all right. I was just talking with somebody who was saying, it's kind of a bummer. They've never been around a tornado. And it's like, no, it's a bummer when you are around a tornado.
Oh, right. Yeah, we actually lived in Cleveland, Tennessee when the F5 hit.
Okay. Oh, ouch. Yeah, we had one hit near Akron, Ohio when I was going to college. Traversed south of Kent, followed along Route 5, which means it missed the Ravenna Arsenal. Yes, Arsenal, as in military, all that kind of fun stuff. Wiped out the downtown Newton Falls and hit it on toward Niles, where it collapsed a skating rink, and
Wow.
people got to see what happens when you have a tank that has now suddenly low pressure on the outside.
Wow.
Yeah, they rupture.
Yeah.
It was hit the it was petroleum storage tanks. And it was,
yeah.
fortunately, or it'd been a real mess. But when it ruptured, it slammed into the one next to it, and you could see it kind of caved over like a pop can.
Right. Wow. Yeah, they're pretty devastating. Where are you located?
Oh, I'm now in Dallas, north side of Dallas and Allen.
Oh, so you still get them?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I went from one end to the other.
Still in the alley.
Yeah. Although at least I'm not in Norman, Oklahoma. They are convinced that tornadoes have a crosshairs on them every year.
I think they do get hit a lot right in that area.
Yeah, Oklahoma gets hit a lot more, just a little bit further north.
Yeah.
But yeah, we had one hit Dallas several years ago.
Yeah.
And and I had just flown up to Ann Arbor, Michigan for my company. And, my emergency response team, I start seeing notifications on the phone, right?
Uh-huh.
But I was able to get through to my wife. So she was okay. Everything was fine here. But before I got through to her, I was just, on the way to the hotel and I'm seeing the phone ding.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the driver, so it's kind of hard to, mess with dialing.
Right.
I was talking with my manager, checking in with him once I got up there. And I said, how are things going in Dallas? And he goes, well, we're doing okay. And I says, well, that's good, because, I wanted to check in with you to make sure everything was okay down there. I didn't need to come back, and this is my wife is okay. And so I didn't have to worry about my trip. And he goes, what are you talking about? You wouldn't be able to get a plane. I says, no, I got a rental car, right? He goes, yeah, man. I says, let's see, here through St. Louis, and that takes me down to Oklahoma, and then on into Dallas from the north side. He goes, that's oddly specific. I said, it was already planned.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we don't have a lot of natural disasters in Phoenix.
Yeah.
It's just
You
hot.
just have heat.
It's just hot.
Yeah. I was surprised to find out that midday it can get hot enough they have to shut down the airport because the planes can't get enough to get off the ground.
That is totally true. That has happened bunches of times,
But as the joke goes, it's a dry heat, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it is. Although it just killed some girl recently. She was out hiking.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, it is dangerous. Especially when it's in those like 112s, 115s. I think especially too when it's been super hot and it just dips down a little, and it's still hot, but it's not like 117. It's like 112 or 110.
Because you're used to that.
Right. It's like 115, 117 for several days, and then it dips down a little bit and they go hiking and then they get hurt.
Yeah.
Because
between the heat and dehydration, because
pretty dangerous.
It's dry there.
Yeah, that is pretty dangerous.
And but yeah, it's like, watching people, at the end of the year, when I was in school, you go from 70s, 80s when when school year starts and it drops down to the low 60s, and they're like threatening to put on winter coats, and they got jackets. And
Mhm.
come spring, it gets up to like high 50s, so it's colder than what I just mentioned. And the girls are out front sunbathing in their bikinis because it's hot.
Right.
You
Right. Well, people put on parkas here when it's like 82 degrees. So
Yeah.
they're like, it's freezing. I'm like, it's really not. It's like 78. I mean, I don't know
Yeah.
what you guys are
No, it's
talking
not bad.
about. I'm like, it's normal. I mean,
No, freezing is when I have to get out my winter coat that I used to when I was going to school in Ohio. If I get that one out, it's cold. It's good to minus 40. Yes, I've
Yeah.
tested it to that.
yeah, if I want to be cold, I'll go to Flagstaff.
Yeah. So we've got 3 people so far tonight. How's everybody else doing?
I'm fine. Hi, everybody. How are you guys?
Doing okay.
Doing okay so far. Very, very hot. Very hot.
Yep.
I live in Texas also. I live in Austin. Well, Georgetown.
Okay.
Not
Okay.
far from Austin. I mean,
Yeah.
it's brutal. It's brutal out there.
Yeah, and you're a little more humid than Dallas is usually too.
Yeah.
Yes.
The closer you get to Houston, right? And then Houston is just waterlogged.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah, Houston, you get in, get toward August, you just go outside and you just swim out the door,
Yeah, totally.
And that's
Is it hotter than
before-
Miami?
I think Miami has gets more of a breeze than Houston does, I think. I haven't lived in either one appreciably to really say, but yeah, Houston is just not, from people who are in the know, it's not near as bad as say New Orleans, but
Yeah.
I'll take the word for it.
Yeah, New Orleans is pretty hot too. But Florida's hot too, yeah.
Yeah, all of Florida is. But it's good for scuba diving.
Nice.
Get started here in just a moment. So yeah, I tend to be quite aware of the weather since I work with a disaster response team. So they're calling for thunderstorms tonight, but I'm looking at the weather maps going, I'm not seeing it, but NWS, National Weather Service, is saying possible thunderstorms. Like, okay. So
Let's see, what is your guys' weather in Dallas? A lot of my people are in Dallas too.
there we go. We'll get this ball rolling here. So we're getting into week 2 here, and a lot of people have gotten the, if not all, the majority of the first 4 parts done. And in general, I've not had to push too many, excuse me, push back too many of them for additional information or updates of some kind. So on the whole, I'd say you've done pretty good. I still see a couple of them out there that are waiting to come my way, so I'll worry about them when they get to me. But everything is graded up to this point. So tonight we're going to add part 5 to this. And this is setting up in this case, setting up a web server. And let me share my screen so we can look at the assignment. I love how when I share my screen, it decides to take my chat and hide it from me. There it is, in case I need it. But fairly common practice in systems engineering, systems management is installing a service and configuring it to run. Now, we may not always necessarily be the ones that do final configuration. That may actually come from the application when the application gets deployed, but at least enough to where things are up, functioning, can be tested, that, well, in this case, a web server. Yes, we can hit it from the internet. So when the application comes along, it's going to do as expected, things like that. So that it's up and running, and we can check that box off. So in this case, we're going to be installing a web server, and we're recommending you install Apache. There are other web servers, some of them more or less involved to configure. Nginx, fantastic web server. You can do amazing things with it, but it takes a bit of knowledge to do that correctly, outside of just it's going to serve pages. But you may see that when you get on the job. But what you're going to be doing here is you're going to be installing a web server, and you're going to create a virtual host. So you're going to go into the configuration file. We'll take a quick look at some of the configuration files, just to kind of give you a quick overview of it. But we're going to create a virtual host. Web servers can have virtual hosts where they act like multiple separate web servers. For the longest time, I used to run my own web servers at home, quite literally, right back here. But and I have, at that time, I managed 20 different domains, and each domain had its own web server, but they're all one physical machine. Matter of fact, can't see it, but it's glowing red and blue and green. It changes colors on the front. And that was the web server for all of those. Now, obviously, these are fairly low-powered web servers, because I'm not running a Google. But for a couple of my clients, when I was still doing some consulting, and place for me to experiment on things. So in short, you can have more than one domain running on the same machine. So here we're going to set up a virtual host. Use the standard port, which is the unencrypted port. Port 80 is the standard port for web servers. You'll run into 443, but that involves getting certificates set up and put into place. Probably a little more than we want to do for this week. But if you're interested, that might be an area where you might do a little reading up, maybe a little bit later if you have time. And then from there, you're just going to drop in fairly simple web page to have something to serve. So you'll create this file, and you're going to put in what the host name of it is. So we know what the virtual host is, what the IP address is, which you'll have to fetch that information, and the kernel information. Now, you don't necessarily have to have the script, the web page itself extract it for you. You can put those in, because generally speaking, once the kernel's installed, you're probably not going to change it till an upgrade occurs. The web server, you're dealing with DNS, you're going to have an IP address, you're probably not going to change it. And you really don't change the name of the host that often. So once a machine is built, these are static for a long enough time that you don't have to be overly concerned, unless you're doing something a lot more sophisticated. So you can put those into the HTML file. Now, if you're a programmer where JavaScript and some of those others, if you want to try to be clever, by all means, but that's not part of the assignment. So that gives you brownie points, but doesn't gain you much else.
I was thinking about it, but it's still no. HTML is
yeah.
Suffice.
Yeah, HTML would suffice if it, knowing what I know, if I was on your side, because I'm getting a certification or something and I've got the knowledge, but I want the paper, right? I would go ahead and go, yeah, I could program that. Let's see, the host name is the IP address. Oh, it's a 123 dot, and just type it in. And so don't make it more complicated than it needs to be. And of course, make sure the web server is pointing at that. Some of the configurations may point where you expect, may not. So you need to look at that. So one of the advantages of creating this file, though, is if you don't set up the virtual host correctly, you may get the default page, which is not going to have host name, address, and kernel. So you'll know something's not right. And so then you can go in and look for, okay, what's not going right here. And then, of course, once you've done that, open the web page. It says hereby using this link. Since you're dealing with a contained environment, it's not like you can hit it from the internet from home. To do it, they're recommending you install the Lynx browser, which is a text-based browser. Believe it or not, that's the way we used to do it. All these nice fancy GUIs used to not exist. So yes, I just dated myself. And of course, when all is done, run these 3 commands in the Jupyter notebook so that I can see what the output is. So a lot less big moving parts compared to last week where you had lots of little pieces going on. But the biggest thing is going to be setting up the virtual host correctly so that it does what you expect. Okay. Any questions on what the assignment entails? Okay.
I have oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I have a question. Okay. So, so it's already set by default, the port 80. We don't
Yeah,
have to change it.
usually it's the default in the files, and the web server usually assumes that otherwise.
And right before the session, I managed to complete the part 5, and I just saw that. I'm like, oh, I didn't touch it, but it was working. So I was like, oh.
So you got a web server
Definitely.
working. Do you have the index HTML in place?
Correct.
Okay. Even better. Now this is a live machine again from my lab. This is a Fedora machine. But to kind of give you an idea of what you're looking at as far as configuration files. In Fedora, it's the HTTPD. In Debian, if I recall correctly, it's the Apache. But you're going to have something that looks like this. And not a whole lot really to see at the top level. I'll do this. But we can see we have a number of files that we're looking at. So the configuration directory, which is where everything starts. The conf.d, where you may have other specific things involved. Like in my case, this machine has Nagios running on it. So I have its configuration file here. These could be, I've seen a lot of times here for a lot of different, well, it's the configuration of the various modules. And I was thinking of something else. That, as you can see, there's a lot of modules, so not necessarily everything needs configuration. The default place for logs. All the modules that you're going to use, and a lot of these come along with the installation. So, and generally, unless there's something very specific you need, you usually don't have to play around in here very often. Let's see. I don't see it here. There's a couple that in some of my jobs that I've used that have to be put in specifically, but I'm not seeing them on this one. The run directory, many services will have a run directory. The general rule is, unless there's a real problem, you pretty much ignore that. This file, though, or related to other services, will give you the process ID of the service to make it easy to find. So you can script against that. And in this case, you can see state, we have no information in here. So what are we really looking at? Well, we're looking at the conf file. I bet yet. Like most standard install conf files, lots of comments to explain what's going on and why. So for example, for this machine, you can see server root here. Let's do this. All right, come on. Let's set the numbering here. So line 34. You can see this is setting to where the server root is, so where the server is expecting to find its files. So etc httpd, which in this case is, of course, where our configuration files are. As we go down, we start seeing some. This one specifically is calling out port 80, but you can see the line above it on line 46, a specific address. So you may have it only respond to a specific address, because some machines will have multiple IP addresses. Excuse me. So you may have a web server on a machine that, especially in like a small company, that the machine can be seen from the internet, but you don't want the web server seen to the internet. You may only want it seen internal. Again, it'd be a small company generally where things are kept in-house. But even in Amazon, you know, I only want this to be on an internal address so that you can use it inside the company, but we don't want anyone else getting into it. A number of the web servers that I deal with at the bank are set up like that because, well, they contain sensitive and proprietary information. So we obviously have more than just that as protection, but that's, you know, one line of protection to add to the layers that you can use. This is telling us to include any other configuration files in that conf modules directory we just looked at. What user to run it as and what group. We can change this. Generally speaking, we run it as, again, in Fedora, it's Apache. In Debian, it's www-data. But in some cases, again, like the bank, you know, if they know we're running Fedora, they know what user the web server is running as. So it gives them a little piece of information to add to their attack profile. So we have to change all of ours so that they're not running as the default user. So we have special users we create for that, and we use that user. And even between groups, it's different users, because if you manage to breach my team, that shouldn't give you any more information than we can get away with to the attacker to breach another group. So we have a number of different things. The server admin, a lot of times this is set to whomever, the email address of whomever is managing the system. In particular, the web server, not necessarily the physical host. If we need it to respond as a specific name, but it needs to be something that ideally is in DNS. And then we get into the fun parts. We start seeing stuff like this. This is defining the directory of the web server itself. So no virtual hosts that we just talked about, and whatever parameters we need it to use. So in this case, this is saying allow override, no. So nothing can override the directives that we have here as well. And here we're saying require all denied. Basically, we're not allowing anything to happen here. And then we set up the document root, which ties to up above. And this is generally if you just look at the vanilla install, the document root is where you'll find the vanilla index.html, but we're using a virtual host, so there's a little bit more involved in it. That's much further down the file. So more information on it. We're allowing access. Some options of following. It's called following symlinks. So if a symlink is used within this directory, we will go ahead and honor it. So we can go into a lot of detail here. And here's where our error logs are being defined. If we need to change the level of our logs, we can do it here. And there we go. It doesn't have a generic virtual host in here. Thought it did. But if you but basically what we're just kind of glancing at, it kind of just blowing through. You're going to have something similar for a virtual host as well. And so once you've got the web server running, then you would just simply create the virtual host, and you don't necessarily need, all of this stuff. What I would recommend is, look at the documentation and see exactly what you need. And you may find out it's not as much as you might think. But this is but you'll notice the file is structure where very much like HTML, for those of you who may have done some with it, it starts with the less than greater than nomenclature and ends with the less than backslash greater than nomenclature. So it defines the blocks, and they do need to be nested. So you can see there's one inside here. So keep that thought in mind as you're going through it. Before you start your web server, if you change the configuration though, there's an Apache CTL command. Oh, it doesn't have that. I thought it did. I forgot. But Apache CTL can be used to test your configuration file before you restart it. There we go. Not enough caffeine or too much caffeine. I'm not sure which. But you can also use it to gracefully restart your web server instead of simply dropping it. Or you can do a service restart. a lot of times when you create a new configuration, before you restart the web server, so this is some practice you might want to get into, even though this is a practice class. Run this command and see if it says okay. If it says okay, then you restart the web server. The nice thing, if I can spell Apache, the nice thing about, and you'll notice it didn't say anything, it was assumed successful. The nice thing about Graceful is it'll take things down in a controlled fashion instead of just yanking it out from underneath. For very busy websites that may be much nicer to your customers, so that you don't rip a transaction out from underneath them that's already in flight. But of course, oops, wrong operating system. So again, we're dealing with Fedora here. System restart, of course, just simply restarts it. Either way, whether you use the system CTL or the Apache CTL, always do a status. If this is a production machine, you want to make sure that that guy is running, as we can see right here, before you move on to the next task. That way you can put this out of your mind. It's done, it's up, it's running, it's working. So unless it's a problem that is delayed, which will sometimes happen, it starts up, we see the service starting, it says it was configured, and it is started. But sometimes there's something in the environment that will cause this to fail 5 minutes from now. Those you'll have to rely on monitoring. Unless you know that happens, then keep an eye out for it. But make sure, the nice thing about doing a status with any service is if for some reason it didn't start, you can tell. Even my Nagios, I see it's running. But let's do something like this. Missed a quote. If I do the config test, looks like it's okay. We'll restart it. That seems to be fine. So what you'll find is there's some errors in configuration that the system will recover gracefully from. There are others that may not. So if we go down, let's go down a little further. We misspelled Apache. We didn't check. And we can see it failed. Sometimes it'll tell us nicely here what it is, but these are the system CTL status or journal CTL -XEU on the HTTPD service. But if you just simply do a status, a lot of times it'll tell us something broke. And here we can see what the problem is. Journal CTL. May give a little more information. So here we go. It's telling us what's going on. Failed with an exit code. Failed to start the Apache server. So you can, generally, you work your way backwards until you find out where the problem is. So restart that guy. So keep in mind when, as you're doing the configuration, do that Apache config test, Apache GTL config test to make sure the configuration's right. Now, if you're fairly confident but nothing is talking to it, you know, yes, I've been known to update config file, restart it, check the status. Okay, it's running, life is good. That means I did everything right in the config file. But you know, I'm generally working with a system that is not in production, where I've got a customer trying to get in the front door because he's trying to get to his secure email solution. So you know, so kind of keep that in mind. Checking your config and then restarting the service and checking the status on the service is a good idea. So okay, that's all I've got there. Any questions, any thoughts, concerns on this assignment? Any questions from the prior assignments that, even if you've got it, so far it looks like most everything's done. But any questions you have on it? Let's see, after I've done this and I tried to run the command in Jupyter Notebook, and it's not saying fail with the commands. Well, if the Jupyter Notebook, of course, you're using the terminal let's go see what the so here, this is not so much saying that the service is running in this case. In some of the other ones, if I don't remember if the first one had it or not, but if it said the service wasn't running, then you might go back to the terminal and do the system CTL status to see what's going on, and see what it has to do there. Or, you know, if that's not really saying much, because sometimes the system CTL status doesn't say a whole lot, or at least not a whole lot that's right there. You know, you may then do a restart on the service and do the journal CTL that we just saw to see if it gives you more information. And of course, I didn't mention it, log files are always your friend. They frequently have information in there that will guide you to the right place. If not always, depending on what the type of problem it is, but as a systems administrator, I will do a system CTL first to see if whether a service is running or not. If I've got a complaint, I will do that first because it's easy. If that doesn't tell me anything, I'll do the journal CTL, and because that's going to be a little bit more verbose. As we were looking at a moment ago, I want to see that line that says active and running, and then if that's not being very useful, then you may have to dig into the log files. And in this case, bring this back. Come here, you. Error log is going to be the big one that you're going to be interested in. And unless you know what time something happened, you may, usually you're going to end up starting at the bottom unless it's a really busy log file, and work your way backwards. The access log for the web server simply says, who talked to me? So you can see I've got a bunch of, this is my Nagios checking that the web server is up and running. So I'll see this, once a minute. You can see that's like clockwork here, 1715, 1815, 1915, 2015, minutes, seconds. I'll see it cropping in here. But if a user hit against it, for example, let me bring up Firefox. No, I have it up. Let's get you out of the way. And of course, tail minus F says, give me the last few lines of the file, and then keep an eye on it. If any new lines come in, tell me about it. And I'll usually hit enter so I can see where the break is. But off screen, for example, you can see that I just hit against Nagios. And I have to authenticate to get to it. So I logged in the Nagios, and you can see all of the activity that's going on as the page is loading on the side here. All the various artifacts that it needs to fetch. And as I interact with it, you can see what's going on. So if you know roughly where the problem is on a service that you do have access to manipulate, you could always come in here, do a tail, get a little bit of space, and then go over to whatever tool is being used to talk to it and poke against it and see it happen. So we can see a check just came through. So that's another way that you can potentially troubleshoot something like this, where you can check the error log first, the access log next, if it seems to be a user problem. And my window, where's my window? There it is. Okay. And of course, check these guys. As we can see here that obviously the web server is not working. This is looking for my host example. And it's making sure these two lines are basically getting the IP address of the machine and making sure it's in the host file. So if we go back and look at the host file, let's see, I need another link. Bring that on screen. Come here, you. So we can see that it created the host entry to make sure it's an Etsy hosts. Since we're not dealing with internal domain name service, we need to make sure that it's in Etsy hosts or it's not going to work. Especially since we're doing everything from this machine back to this machine. Under normal conditions, if I tried to talk to this machine, calling it myhost.example.com, it's going to say, I don't know who you're talking about. So it needs to be in the host file. So little tiny piece under the covers there. Any other questions? I'll give you the time to start looking at it and poking at the assignment. And of course, I'm here for you. Any questions you have, anything you don't understand, that's what I'm here for, is to give guidance. And I see somebody's got number 5 already in. Oh, point I did want to bring up. Keep in mind, when you finish the assignment, remember to go into the appropriate Jupyter notebook and run all of those commands in the notebook itself. That helps me when I'm reviewing your assignments to see where things are at, and that might actually tell me everything I need to know, whether you're successful or not. If you're not completely successful, I may have to go in and dig a little bit deeper. Which I'm, of course, more than glad to do, to try to give you pointers in the right direction instead of saying it's not right and good luck. I don't want to do that to you. But you know, at least give you some pointers where to look. So please keep that in mind. So let's see what we got here.
Yay.
There you go. Looks like you got it.
Yeah, yeah. We I kind of get intimidated every time I see so many instructions and whatnot. But once I actually read everything, then I figured out it's not as hard sometimes.
Yeah,
Just as you follow through.
we're trying to give you plenty of information to work with, especially since a lot of these things, this is, you know, the first time you're seeing it, as far as a hot example. You know, granted, in the real world, you know, for something like this, they'd say, we need a web server, tell us what it's going to be, make sure it works. And that may be all the information you get. And so, you know, with that, with something like that, you know, you may have to work with, especially in a larger environment, you may have to work with security to make sure you're following the proper security protocols for a internet-facing web server, or even internal for that matter. I've worked with some companies I've worked at, even internally, we're very stringent on security because the theory was if you're good at keeping in-house clean, you're good at keeping the public side clean too. So everything follows very strict protocols. But then you may have to work with networking to get the which IP address they're going to allow through the firewall, and you know, work with them with telling them which ports you need. Usually, just in some places, you may not even be allowed to use 80. It may be 443. You're going to run secure. One company I worked at, that's the way it always was. The only thing we did up front was if you hit it against HTTP port 80, we would redirect, we would do a refresh to encourage your browser to go to 443. So 80 did not even come inside the walls. So you work with networking to get that. And then, of course, if there's any internal firewalls you have to deal with, propagate through correctly. Then once you get onto the machine, you know, there, generally, if there's firewalls running there, we take care of that. But again, following security's recommendations. And then we can finally, you know, get the server set up. So you can see there may be quite a bit of pre-work in the real world. Now, the environment I described is kind of probably one of the more extreme that you might see. A lot of times it's not near as complex. Some companies, you're security, you're networking, and you're the engineer. You do everything. So those are easy to work in. They're also easy to make a mistake if you're not careful.
Your backgrounds are really something, John.
It's the thing, it's the ones that Mac puts up.
Some of them look like the 80s. And I'm not
Yeah.
mad about it. I am not mad about it.
Yeah, if I was using my my Windows machine, I have to be careful with that one because it well, first of all, you get to see a whole lot of pictures of, you know, my cat, my emergency response team. But the big problem is it has a lot of backgrounds that are, shall we say, rather snarky. Nothing that would necessarily be off color or particularly offensive, but there are just some people that just don't appreciate that sense of humor, you know.
Yep, I totally get it.
But you know, since we didn't have kids, every time the cat does something, well, cats over time does something cute, my wife's got to get the camera out, you know, take pictures. This one kind of reminds me of a undersea scene here, going through the underwater mountains. Well, I guess if there's no questions, you know, well, I'm more than happy to sit here for you. If you feel you've got what you need, you know, feel free to do whatever else you need, and hopefully I'll see a successful assignment start coming in shortly. But if you're here, I'm here.
I do have a question, but I don't know if it pertains more to career coaching because it's more like curiosity.
Feel free.
Is I don't know if this is exactly entry level, you know, opportunities, but apart from junior system admin positions or system engineering positions, what other roles could you in the future apply once you finish all the stages?
Yeah, those would be the couple system administrator, systems engineer, might also see systems manager in some cases. So yeah, those would be, you know, the easy targets. If they say entry level 3 to 5 years experience, apply anyway. Because everybody, hey, if I can get you at entry level, but you got 5 years experience and I'm paying you entry level, I win.
It's true.
But there's only so many of those people around. It takes 3 to 5 years to make one of those, right? So apply.
That's true.
There might be, DevOps tends to be kind of specific, but sometimes there'll be some opportunities there where they're willing to take on somebody who's got a good head on their shoulders, understands systems, and then they can groom you. So that might be one possibility. Sometimes in the security arenas, although usually there they do want more security background, you know, as far as cybersecurity and that. But it's something to at least keep an eye out for, because sometimes you'll run into positions where they're looking for a systems guy to help with. You know, you're going to be the hands for the security team who, their job is not to manage the systems, but, they may want someone who knows a little bit about systems to be their person to do some of that work for them. You might also see something in, what was that? I just got out of my head.
Mhm.
You might knock environments. It doesn't sound glamorous, but some help desk environments have quite a bit of systems administration type activities. Now, granted, this is Linux, and there's a reasonable number of the help desk type things that are going to be more Windows based. But sometimes I've known some people that even though they're want to be a Linux administrator, but they used a help desk position to get into a company where they could then kind of navigate. So that might be another possibility. Sometimes technical customer support, where you're dealing with customers who are internal customers in particular, because a lot of times external customers, again, are going to be dealing with frequently Windows, but internal, you might be able to help with some of that as well, as far as helping them, like developers and whatnot who live on Linux machines. And thank you, Nick. Nick is pointing out the Mac help desk sometimes, because Mac under the covers is actually, it's called BSD, but it's very Linux-like. Matter of fact, back in the day, 2 seconds of history here, you had what eventually became your System 5 Linux, which was what your commercial Linux, and then BSD evolved out of that to become kind of the academic side of the house. So
Interesting.
something that's BSD is also, for practical purposes, Linux. So anything that is Linux, like Chrome, like Chromebooks and such, under the covers, that is running a Linux-like operating system, mostly in Java, but but it's Linux under the covers, as well as things like Android and some of your other platforms. They mentioned BusyBox. That's a stripped down Linux. So sometimes some of your back-end firewall work is Linux, effectively Linux based. So those are some other ideas that you might look at as well. So look for Mac, Chrome, Android support. Not so much maybe not so much the direct customer support, where someone like my wife would be calling you saying, why won't my phone turn on? But where you're doing something a little more technical. Since you're doing this to be more technical and not field.
Of course.
So those are some other options you may have. And I'm sure there's more than I'm not thinking of as well. So I would say when you hit the job boards, do a generic search on things like Linux, BSD, which Berkeley Software Development, BSD. As we pointed out, Mac, Chrome, Android, and see what other kinds of skills and titles are appearing that appeal to you. Because you may go, oh, that's something I hadn't thought about. So hopefully that'll give you a little bigger target.
Yeah, because the things that, well, probably infrastructure doesn't evolve as much as development, but like everything that is like it has a blurry line between development and everything else.
Yes,
It's kind of hard. Like, for example, I was talking to my engineer friends the other day, getting some insights, and they were talking about the difference between solutions architects. Like solutions architect, it could be even sales for depending on or people that are even regular software developer could be called a
Yep.
solutions architect. Even a cloud engineer could be called a solutions architect. And it's like, so there probably gonna be 3 types of, or even 4 types of solutions architect. And they're like throwing this around because there are companies out there offering solutions architect boot camps and things like that.
Yeah.
So,
And now you'll see, for example, Amazon, Google, Azure, they have solutions architects certifications. Well, what you'll notice with those, it's somebody who's got some experience already. And in a lot of company, to become an architect, you usually have to have some experience, and usually not in just one field. When I was a consultant, I was a principal consultant, and but to become a principal consultant, you either had to be an absolute total expert at a particular field, like databases, not just Oracle, databases, or if you're a process specialist like I was, I had to know database. I had, even though I'm trained as a software engineer, but I didn't have to be a software engineer, but I had to have the knowledge to be able to argue with them. Like, no, this is why it's not going to work this way. This is why I need this, that type of thing. Of course, I know database, I know networking, and I know a little of everything, so that I could basically help specify the project for the customer. Because a lot of times I was brought in with, we know we need something that's kind of sort of maybe like that. Notice all the wiggle room in there, right? And it was my job to go in and figure that out and determine, do we need to bring in a database expert? Do I need to bring in some developers to work with us? Do I need to bring in someone who knows security far more than I do? Because I'm broad. So yeah, for the architects, and architects frequently go in pre-sales and sales situations as well. But generally those, you're going to be a little more senior by the time you get those. But if it's something to aspire to, look at the types of solutions architects are out there and determine what skills you need to start grafting onto what you already know.
awesome. Thank you.
Anything else? Well, if not, I think we're a couple of minutes past time here. So unless you have questions, we'll wrap it up here. Get together on Thursday. If you have any questions on the assignment or prior assignments, of course, bring those. And if it turns out there's not much in the way of other questions, if questions like this where you're just asking for some more information on something that's related to the field, I'm more than happy to share. Okay. So with that, I think we'll call it an evening, and good luck on your assignments. Like I said, we've got one done already, so hopefully I'll see a lot more shortly.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Good night, guys.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Stay out of trouble, Nick. Yep, you got away.